Well, now to Crimea, and Russian officials are being threatened with economic sanctions following the referendum there, which saw almost 97% of voters choose to rejoin Russia. Russia denies that the vote was illegal. Well, let's discuss that. With me to discuss the implications here in the studio, Robert Brinkley, a former British ambassador to Ukraine, and joining us from Moscow is the Russian political analyst Dmitri Babich. Very good morning, good afternoon to you, Mr. Babich. Why can and how can Russia deny that this vote was illegal?
Well, during the last 3 months, we have heard a lot of lies on all sides. So if the Western leaders for 3 months have been saying that people in Kiev who were throwing Molotov cocktails at policemen were peaceful protesters, then obviously Putin decided that he can play the same game, and he can say that these are self-defense forces operating in Crimea, and that this referendum is legal. What is for sure that is that the majority of Crimeans want to become Russian citizens. And it's impossible to deny it, not only because of the referendum that was held yesterday, but also because during all of the presidential elections, the pro-Russian candidate, including Mr. Yanukovych, during the last election, got no less than 80% of the vote in Crimea. So I believe the reports that Crimeans do not want to live under the government that Ukraine now has in Kiev.
Well, I mean, the question was about the legality of it all. I wanted to bring in Mr. Brinkley here. I mean, did two wrongs make a right in that the removal of President Yanukovych, well, questionable under international law, whether that was legal or not, whether that was a coup, whether it went through all the processes. Does that mean then that Russia can stage this referendum in Crimea and meet the wishes of the Crimean people?
The international community has no doubt that this referendum in Crimea was illegal and illegitimate. Last week there was a meeting of the United Nations Security Council. Russia was the only one who took a different view. Even China abstained. 13 countries representing the whole of the rest of the world disagreed with Russia on that. The Ukrainian constitution does provide for referendums, even for the possibility of changing the borders of the state. But it's very clear that all the people of Ukraine have to vote in such a referendum, not just the people of Crimea. And of course, in this case, the people of Crimea were voting at 2 weeks' notice, at the point of a gun, under Russian occupation. Ukrainian television had been taken off air. It was only Russian television shown. Who was counting the votes? Hasn't been at all clear how this result was arrived at.
Yeah, and let me, put that straight back to Moscow then, Dmitri Babich. I mean, that is the question, isn't it? Surely it's up to the government of Ukraine to stage a referendum in any part of its territory. That's something that Russia cannot do.
Well, unfortunately, I can give you another example. In Scotland, hopefully, I think this year, the Scottish people will hold a referendum on whether they want to remain a part of the United Kingdom. Not the people of England, not the people of Wales, but the people of Scotland will decide it.
But I mean, I have to interrupt there, Mr. Babich, because this is something that we all know a lot about in the UK. But that's gone through legal process. There have been treaties signed between the Scottish First Minister and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It's legal.
Well, the whole problem that the current Ukrainian government is not very legal, because obviously it didn't go through the whole process. Obviously, there was a violent seizure of power in Kiev. Unfortunately, the European Union, which was supposed to guarantee the separation of powers between former President Yanukovych and the opposition, failed to, enforce these guarantees. It didn't, the European Union did not find a single critical word for the new authorities in Kiev. So when you have a breach of legality in Kiev, how can total legality be maintained in Crimea?
Just want to move that on there, then with Mr. Brinkley here. And I mean, we hear there a perfect encapsulation, I suppose, of the position being taken by Putin and the Russian leadership. How do you get them to change that point of view? What pressure can be put on them? Can the West do anything meaningful to make them change that position?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to keep pointing to the facts and the truth, not listening to these lies about what happened. Yanukovych and his regime killed 100 of their own people and injured 600 more. He signed an agreement brokered by the 3 EU foreign ministers, but instead of implementing it and signing a change to the constitution, he ran away. The parliament of Ukraine then voted by 82% of the parliament, more than a two-thirds majority, to install a new acting government. That is a legitimate government.
So that's one step. I mean, you underline the legal and, I suppose, the moral position. But what about actual pressure? Because that, so far, has not changed Putin's views or actions.
Well, the international community, and in particular the European Union and the United States, have been very firm throughout this crisis, working together. Today, the European Union foreign ministers are meeting, and William Hague said this morning he expected they will agree sanctions on the Russian leaders who authorised this aggression against Ukraine.
Mr. Babic, how will Russia react if, as expected, some form of sanctions are implemented against Russian citizens and indeed trade links between the West and Russia? What will come back then? What will the response be from Moscow?
Well, I'm just not sure that these sanctions will be really painful, because the EU has been openly hostile to Russia since the end of the 90s, and all sanctions that could be imposed on Russia without direct financial damage to the EU, they have already been imposed. The EU said that they are putting on hold negotiations on the visa-free regime between Russia and the EU. Unfortunately, these negotiations have been dragging on since 2003 without any result. The same is true about the Partnership and Cooperation Agreement, which expired back in 2004. And again, we have this lengthy process with the EU. So I don't think that the EU will be able to damage Russia more than it has already done even before the Ukrainian events. Also, I'm not going to say that what Mr. Brinkley said was a lie, but I want to say that calling what happened in Crimea occupation is a dreadful lie.
Okay. Last quick thought, Mr. Brinkley, on the fact that, what Dmitri Babic is saying there, well, you can't really hurt Russia very much indeed, because, relations are already pretty frosty. It could get painful for both sides, this.
It could be painful for both sides, and that's because there is quite an interdependence economically between the European Union and Russia. And some countries in the European Union receive a lot of gas and oil from Russia. Russia is also very dependent on exporting gas and oil. About 80% of its exports come from that. A lot of that goes to Europe. But Chancellor Merkel and other European leaders have said that if necessary, they're willing to take some short-term pain in order to preserve stability and peace in Europe and respect for international law.
OK, Robert Brinkley, Dmitri Babic, thank you both very much indeed for your views. Now, coming up on Sky.